I finally got to see Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings last night. Boy, oh boy, am I so excited that this new hero has entered the MCU. I absolutely cannot wait to talk about it with you guys today. And spoiler warning, I won't talk about absolutely every single detail of this movie. However, this will contain massive spoilers for the movie and the entire plot, and even just the format of the film. So if you haven't seen it, come back and watch this after Labor Day weekend when you're able to catch the film. I highly recommend you go see it. There's not a Disney Plus option this time, so please go support this film while you can. First and foremost, I want to talk about this guy right here, Simu Liu, Shang-Chi himself. This man is the perfect addition to the MCU, both as an actor and as a character and what he brings to the world. Shang-Chi, I think, is one of the most unique characters to be introduced to the MCU currently, because he is an older character, but he has that childlike wonder and kind of lack of responsibility in the world. That's at least how we're introduced to him. But of course, we learn later that he has this very complex, dark past and a very complicated family history that kind of influences his want to run away from his responsibility. It's a very coming of age and accepting your responsibility and your place in the world, combining what destiny has set up for you as well as what you want from your life, which I think Shang-Chi embodies perfectly. And I think it's a really great representation of an Asian American character in the MCU. Obviously, I can't speak from my own personal experience for this, but I think this story has a lot of elements to it that I think are brought up in a lot of other movies that deal with representation of this character who is both westernized but has these Eastern ties in his past and is trying to accept the culture imbalance between the Western individual mindset and then the family traditional mindset that Shang-Chi's family comes from, and his responsibility of running the Ten Rings organization, which obviously he doesn't want to do because it's a crime syndicate. He's just wanting to be a valet in San Francisco. I want to see him and Scott Lang run into each other eventually because, I know they just live down the street from each other, okay? I just know it. This movie embodies a lot of what I think made Black Widow so great, at least for me, is the specificity of the film to the character, both in form, the type of fighting, the kind of conversations that the character has. Natasha is very much dealing with family in the same way Shang-Chi is dealing with family. However, their relationships to their families and the levels of intensity there are much different. I also especially loved the martial arts influence, and I want to do a lot of research into what techniques they actually use, because I want to say in a couple interviews for the film, they spoke about how they were combining different forms of martial arts or specifying them to a specific character so that their styles of fighting matched up with their personalities, which I think is most evident in the fight between Wenwu and Zhongli, Shang-Chi's mother. In the Forest of Talo, I think that is the most interesting, unique battle, and I don't think there's something like that in the MCU. Simu Liu's just screen chemistry, him and the camera, it's just fantastic. He's a natural in this universe. He's both funny but can take on the severity of things. He carries himself as a character who has this complex past, and you feel that despite this character being a brand new face on screen to the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I just think he fits in so nicely, and I can't wait to see him interact with more characters. Obviously, we get to see him a little bit with Wong, and then of course in the end with Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner over a type of interdimensional FaceTime. But I absolutely love how this character is being introduced to the MCU and how his 10 rings and then his different fighting styles combined from both of his parents is really setting him up to be such a unique superhero within this universe. I want to talk about Katy, played by Awkwafina. I know a lot of people have kind of mixed bag of emotions on Awkwafina. She's a comedic actress, and a lot of times she's played in that very over-the-top role within films. But here, I think Destin Daniel Crenton, the director of this film, was able to really give her directions that allowed us to see the range, because Awkwafina was in a film called The Farewell. The Farewell was a movie that was on a lot of award show radars, but it showed a very dramatic side of Awkwafina's acting chops, and I think here you get the perfect blend of all of that scaled back, not completely dramatic, not completely comedic, but this character who, yeah, she's very funny and she starts the film with this very free spirit, but throughout the film we get to see her journey to kind of finding her identity as well. So I liked that parallel between Shang-Chi and Katy. But I also really think that Simu Liu and Awkwafina have amazing chemistry on screen. You really feel like their friendship is genuine and it's been there for as many years as they say it's been. But additionally, you get the sense that there might be something more there that will be explored in future films, and I really, really loved that. Then, I think the character that is obviously on everyone's radar, that everyone is paying attention to in this film, is Wenwu, Shang-Chi's father, also known as the Mandarin, the leader of the Ten Rings. Now, I think this was the perfect way to address the entire Mandarin history, both from the comics, which have not the greatest representation of an Asian character, as well as the upset of a lot of comic book fans of how the Mandarin was handled in Iron Man 3. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I've always really liked Trevor Slattery. I thought that was a very interesting kind of flip on things, but I think this movie did absolutely everything in that category of fixing the Mandarin the correct way. I like the entire conversation that Wenwu has about names and that interaction he has with Katy when he asks what her Chinese name is and she says it and I can't remember what it is. Then he refers to her as that, and you can tell just in that character choice that he's extremely traditional. He very much believes in family values, but he's definitely been corrupted by these 10 rings, both the organization and his items of power, in how he sees the world as something to be conquered. I think Wenwu is a perfect antagonist to Shang-Chi, because the same way that Wenwu has sins of his past, but was able to give that all up for Shang-Chi's mother when he fell in love with her and he gave up his life to have a family and then returned to that power after a moment of weakness when his wife died. I think you get to see in Shang-Chi this want to be good, and he has this dark past of his father, but he's trying to escape that and be better and fight against it. And that even crops up in the way he feels like he should handle things, in the sense that he initially wants to kill his father at the end of the film, but ends up sparing him because he knows that that's not the right thing to do or what his mother would have wanted him to do. And so I think that mix of good and bad and all of that within us, it's perfectly addressed in Michelle Yeoh's line of "you are your mother, but you are also your father." You have a good and bad in you. You have these two different styles of fighting, and I just think that played out really interestingly between the two characters, and especially with Black Widow, and I go to it because it's the most recent comparison. Even though the villain is extremely specified, he feels almost like a watcher over the whole situation who's like meddling. Wenwu has a very direct tie to Shang-Chi and the story at large, and I really enjoyed that. I also really like the fact that he was holding Trevor Slattery as like a jester. I think that's hilarious, and I also really did enjoy going back to that relationship between him and Shang-Chi. That moment at the end when they're looking at one another and you have those flashbacks to the past of them, father and son, looking at one another throughout time. It very much reminded me of the Return of the Jedi scene. Luke chooses to save and spare his father, and then his father makes a sacrifice for him. Both characters kind of have to make a choice. They accept the good and bad in each other. I don't know. I can't properly articulate how powerful that scene was, but the combination of the flashbacks and then the two choices of the two characters just made it really powerful, and I think people are really going to enjoy Wenwu's character in this film, and he will go down as one of the better villains in the MCU. However, speaking of that final fight scene, and I don't want to be overly critical of this film, but I do think this needs to be said, because if you look at my Letterboxd rating or where it falls in rankings, I think you should know like what my issues were with the film. In that final climax battle at Tallow, there's so much going on. We've had a plethora of great characters in this film, and I think everyone is kind of given different stories in the fact that they feel all very fleshed out and not just kind of dropped down. Having all of those characters have very specific personalities, wants, specific tasks to do within that final battle scene was great. However, at points, there was just too much going on, because we kept cutting back to what Awkwafina was doing or what Trevor Slattery, of all people, was doing in that battle. And it would be in the heat of Shang-Chi fighting with Wenwu, where the emotional and physical center of that fight was happening. We'd cut away from it, which broke a little bit of tension for me, especially when it was used for comedic relief purposes, such as Trevor and Morris surviving and playing dead in the battlefield. Those moments kind of took it away from me. And then when it became a dragon fight, a little bit with the Great Protector fighting the like soul sucker dragon. It was just a little too much for me, and I think maybe too much I had in my head that other people who were going to look at this film extremely critically were going to use that as a point where too much was going on, and I would have to agree with that. It became less about our characters because they were so small on screen, like you could hardly identify them in this mass of this big battle that was going on. Had it been maybe 5 minutes shorter, a little bit more efficient of a climax, I think that would have cut a lot of my complaints about that. It just felt a little bit too much like an Avengers level threat, to quote Mysterio. However, the camera work in 90% of the fight scenes in this movie is beautiful. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of action movies fall victim to extremely short shot lengths and a lot of really jittery, messy camera work. This movie really made you pause and watch the action. The camera flowed in ways that complemented the fighting styles and the action on screen in a way that made you really pay attention to it, as opposed to just saying, oh, we need a quick little like punch, jab, and then cut back to the story. It felt very much like it was purposeful and intentional. Of course, I've already spoken about the scene between Wenwu and Zhongli, Shang-Chi's parents, when they first meet in the forest. That is one of the most stunning sequences that I've ever seen in a Marvel movie, so major props there. The bus scene in its entirety, in such a confined space, they were able to use the camera and go around and move through the bus in these crane shots or just switching of angles, made everything in the fight scene extremely comprehensible without making it feel like the action wasn't going fast or like the threat wasn't extremely there. But my favorite has to be the scaffolding fight sequence when they are on the outside of the fighting ring that Shang-Chi's sister has set up, and they're fighting and he's trying to save Awkwafina while also fighting off these assassins, and then his sister comes back. The way the camera moves in and out of the scaffolding to follow him as he chases down Katy, oh my gosh, it is so good. I can't wait to rewatch this movie and see that again because I genuinely thought it was just top-notch filmmaking, so I gotta give the camera work credit there. Lastly, to end on a positive note, and my absolute favorite part of this entire film is how the flashbacks are told. The non-linear addition of the flashbacks and the recontextualization of different shots throughout the film is brilliant. It adds to the feel of family throughout the film, and the fact that this very much could have been a film where they chose to have the first 30 minutes be all of that flashback information, just a ton of exposition, right? Just at the front. Whereas in this film, each time something was referenced, whether it be information as he tells someone else, usually Katy, about what happened to their mother, when his father was training him, all of that kind of stuff, the fact that that was dispersed throughout the movie really made it feel like one cohesive story and did make the connection between father, son, sister, mother, the entire family feel so much more cohesive with the themes of the film. The most powerful, again, being when Shang-Chi and Wenwu look at each other as Wenwu is sacrificing himself for his son. When they do the flashback to all the times that they've looked at one another and just kind of pressed heads throughout the movie, I just started, tears were leaking, okay? And I really appreciate telling the story in that way and continually getting the repetition of this is how the past happened and adding new story information each time those flashbacks did occur. And I think that's something that will add to the rewatchability and entertainment value of this film in years to come as we revisit it. That adds so much more depth to each moment because it shows you what each character is thinking at those moments without having to give you a huge exposition dump. That is what makes this film such a great installment into the MCU, is it breathes the history of the character even though we are just meeting him. If this is what the future of origin story solo films is in phase 4, like bring it on, baby. I am so pumped. That, guys, is my review of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Have you seen the movie yet? If so, please let me know in the comments down below what you thought. If you agree with my review or don't, but kind of like some of the stuff I said, be sure to give this video a like. And if you're interested in more reviews like this, or just a geek who likes to talk about Marvel content, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a video from me. And please go see this movie. I know there's been a lot of controversy with the theatrical window and the non-release on Disney+, and I really just want this movie to do well so that it doesn't become a number or an experiment in the way that some of the Disney executives have been potentially handling it, but instead I want this movie to shine as one of the next greatest installments in the MCU and the introduction to a great hero that I think is going to have a lot of longevity in the MCU going forward. Thank you guys again. Have an absolutely amazing day, and I will see you all in my very next video. Bye, y'all.